Good evening to all who have tuned in to Globespan 24/7. And sorry for the late start. This is the Guyanese Critic, at least the voice of the Guyanese Critic you're hearing, the realest thing coming out of Guyana. And I was asked to assist with moderating Globespan this evening since Dr. Asha Kissoon has had a sudden death in the family. Condolences to you, Dr. Asha Kissoon. This evening we're having on Chartered Accountant Christopher Ram and Attorney Timothy Jonas. I don't think these guys are known to most Guyanese locally and abroad, and they are known for being stand-up, straight-talking Guyanese of good background and good standing. So welcome, Mr. Jonas and Mr. Ram.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Rodriguez, how are you doing?
Can't complain. Life couldn't be better. I wish Guyana would be better. So going straight into it, I must say, apologize again for the late start as a result of poor internet connectivity. I'm hoping with our work, the kind of work we do, Guyana will be a better place and we'll have a fast internet and so on, right? But let me start with you, Mr. Ram. You have recently conducted a number of audits. I think 20 audits. Would that be correct figure, 20 audits?
No, I think that's an exaggeration.
How many audits?
Well, the entities identified were about 17.
17?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, obviously
they were conducted by more than one person. So it's and
well, you were a part of a group of persons who conducted audits.
That's
yes,
correct.
Cool. And I wouldn't call 3 away from 17 an exaggeration, sir. By Guyana standards, these wrong off things from half all the way. And you know, Guyanese, you gotta see with me. We have lawyers who don't know the difference between 32 and 33 making 65. So you gotta see with me. Forgive me, please. Tell me, Mr. Ram, have these audits that you were a part of uncovered any irregularity that would raise eyebrows?
I think I speak for everybody. We accepted the engagement as patriotic Guyanese, but we are all professionals. When we submit our reports, they are matters for the persons who organize with us to carry out such audits. And certainly as a chartered accountant, I regard that as a professional relationship. I do not disclose anything any work I do professionally. So, and I don't,
well,
you don't blame me for not being
No, Mr. Ram, no. But again, all I ask is not for you to divulge any information, but I asked you in your audits if your eyebrows would have been raised by anything.
You know, in the expenditure of public funds and the sometimes loose arrangements that exist, the professional who seeks the ideal situation will always have his or her eyebrows raised. Sometimes they're explanations that are satisfactory, sometimes they're not satisfactory. But one does not wish to make conclusions out of any exercise that is not thorough, that does not go to the heart of the matter, that does not interview persons and does not robustly challenge transactions. But you look at things and you say, no, this doesn't sound right. It doesn't seem right.
So you have had experiences or instances in the last few weeks where you notice things that doesn't seem right, and that's normal in accounts. That's normal. There's not an abnormal thing.
Good, you've answered the question for me, Critic.
Roger that, Chief. So I'm going to go I'm going to go right into Mr. Jonas because it's now I really seen the header for today's program. It's accountability and transparency. And there's nobody more transparent than me because I talk out all my stories. Just that me transparency is a little more down to earth. Mr. Jonas, Timothy Mingo, Claremont Mingo, as a matter of fact, was arrested yesterday. I was reliably informed that they had to take him out from under his bed. He did not want to go. Can you tell me, give me your take on this? Are we going in the right direction? You know, from the legal perspective, are we going in the right direction? Because some people, Mr. Mingo's lawyer did a live video. I don't know if he's trying to take away my kind of job. And he was explaining brutality, none of which I saw. And he made a reference to going back to the dark days. And he's the first speculating lawyer. I don't know if he's a speculator, spectator, or what, but he did mention speculate. From what is going on as it results to the criminal investigation into electoral fraud, are we on track? Guyana, I mean, legally, are we doing the right things?
I think that's a good question to start with, especially under the heading accountability and transparency. We know there was an attempt to rig the elections, and we know that that is the worst harm you can do to a democracy. So whoever it was that implemented that perpetrated it, needs to be brought to account. The reason they need to be brought to account is because in 5 years, whoever's in charge of the electoral process must understand that if they try to do the same, they will be brought to account. For too long, things slide, things get by, because as Chris says, our systems are loose, our systems are not structured, we ignore systems. Now, I heard Anil Nandlal on one of the many political programs that the new government is getting into in their honeymoon period, enjoying the approbation of the public, make the point, and it was a valid point, but I didn't like that it came from the Attorney General. He made the point that he was arrested, that Bharat Jagdeo was arrested, that Raja Lanchan, Robert Prasad, they were arrested 5 years ago, and they were taken down to whichever police department it was, I think it was Soku, questioned, released, that kind of thing. So when now complaints are made about Mingo, Duncan, and the new lot being arrested, his response was, why are you complaining? When the shoe was on the other foot, it happened. That's not my response. My response is that it was wrong 5 years ago, and it is wrong now, for the very simple reason that our most important right is our right to liberty and our right to protection of our property. And the police must not arrest you unless they don't have a choice. So if a charge has been brought, if Mingo is suspected of something and information has gone to the police and the police legal people have looked at it, or the DPP has looked at it and decided that they have enough information, enough evidence to justify laying a charge against Mingo, they need to lay a charge against Mingo. They need to find him, serve him with a summons to come to court. Now, Lowenfield was arrested. Should not have been arrested. Should have been served with a summons to come to court. 5 years ago, Jagdeo, Lanchan, Robert Prasad should not have been arrested. None of these people have flight risks. They're not running out of the country to get away. You arrest someone, the police arrest someone, should arrest someone only if they are a flight risk. Only if there is a fear that this person is not going to come to magistrate's court to face the charge, to face the charge with which he has been, the offense with which he has been charged. The same rule applies today that applied 5 years ago. So although I have my opinion about the Christopher Joneses, the Mingos, the Lowenfields, right is right and wrong is wrong. And if we live in a democracy where the system must work, then the police must do their work. And if you are not a flight risk, They must present you with a summons that says, come to court on Monday because we have a charge to prefer to the magistrate because we think you're guilty of a crime and we are going to prove it to the magistrate. But you do not lock people up unless you have a real fear that they will run away, they will abscond, so they won't turn up on Monday before the magistrate. We saw it happen 5 years ago, we're seeing it happen now.
I never heard you speak of this before, Timothy. Is it as a result that the question has never been asked before? Because I can tell you, every Guyanese who is taken to the station, no matter how frivolous the matter is, just get hold for 72 hours and just be arrested. And a lot of them are not flight risks.
Well, if you haven't heard me talk about it, Critic, it's because you haven't been listening. Because I have repeatedly talked about it. I've written about it in Starbuck News since back when I was president of the bar in 2009, 2010, more than 10 years ago. This is something that undermines our democracy. It undermines our rights as citizens. It is an abuse of power, and it is something I feel strongly about. So I know, I was there, I saw when these people committed the crimes they committed. But that doesn't change the fact. I'm not the judge who can find them guilty. Evidence has to be presented. They have to be charged before a magistrate. They have to be convicted by that magistrate. And unless you think they're going to run away, there is absolutely no reason why you must be holding them in prison. Because even when you arrest them, and all Guyanese hear about this thing, oh, we arrest him as part of our investigation. As soon as you say that, you're admitting an illegality. Because the first thing you're supposed to do when you arrest someone is tell them you have a right not to say anything to incriminate yourself. So why are you arresting a man, telling him don't say anything to incriminate yourself, but we still arresting you to investigate you? Nonsense. And yet we hear about it over and over and over. And people's rights are trampled on, and we quarrel when we say we're second-class citizens. We're second-class citizens because we deserve to be, because we tolerate it.
Do you have a take on this, Mr. Ram, being an attorney yourself? Do you have a take on what?
I do not practice criminal law. I'm a little bit surprised that Tim is suggesting that you cannot arrest someone as part of an investigation into a possible crime. But I will defer to Tim on this matter.
Well,
okay.
Let me hear. So when Chris says you can't, of course you can. We've been doing it for 50 years in this country. You shouldn't. The judge's rules. The judge's rules are quite clear that when a policeman arrests you, much as you see on all the TV shows in the States, they need to tell you have a right not to incriminate yourself, not to answer questions. Now that, of course, confounds the very concept of arresting somebody so you could ask them questions to charge them. It doesn't work.
Timothy, you were saying that the persons are not a fright risk. But I heard, and I think it was said by Barjagya, I don't know if it was just to drive the fear of God into Mingo and Lowenfield, for them to defer from committing a fraudulent act. But does the electoral fraud attract at the highest end life imprisonment?
I don't know, Critic. You're asking me something I don't know about. I practice commercial law. What I can tell you is that if I do an investigation, I'm the police, and I investigate Critic, and I find out Critic stole that item yesterday, I have enough evidence before me. But the offense didn't happen today. It happened 3 weeks ago. But I've now investigated. What I should do if I think that when I serve you your summons to go to court, that you will run away, I should go and find a magistrate and say to that magistrate, here is my evidence to show Critic committed this offense. And here is my evidence to show why I believe he will run away. Please grant me an arrest warrant so I could go and arrest him. The structure is carefully orchestrated to protect your right. And we trample it all the time.
Fair. And I take note, and I'm always willing to learn from you, Timothy. Mr. Ram, you were very outspoken. You've been very outspoken all the time as it relates to irregularities in the accounting, in government accountability, and so on. Are you satisfied? You see what happened for the last 5 months, but nonetheless, it is obvious that the attitude of politicians are similar, if not guided by a force that comes from the people who they are supposed to serve. Are you satisfied with how things are going so far with the new PPP-led administration? I mean, in terms of the placement of ministers, is there anything that you see that you're dissatisfied with? How they're rolling out things? Is it too early, or have you seen things that you think you want to make a point on and notes should be taken of?
Well, I think any objective, independent person should assess a situation based on whatever is out there. At the moment, we've had less than 4 weeks, and I think it's fair that any government that has won the popular vote in our system, the majority, has a right to make certain decisions. Once those decisions are not made outside of the law, the most they can do is send some signals that you may be somewhat uncomfortable with. But I think we ought to allow a government sufficient space to manage the affairs of the state as the people have elected it to do.
Mr. Ram, we did allow the previous administration their first 100 days, to which they failed, and then 2 years after that, to which they became a bigger failure, and then 18 months after that, to which they totally disregarded the Constitution, and then 5 months after that, there was bare chaos and confusion. Don't you think we should be dealing with governments differently from our past experiences?
Well, you've got a good point there, and I don't think this PPP government, we cannot regard it as completely new kids on the block. I think I said it the other day. I view it as 23 years plus, and it has enough experience. It has reasonable expertise. It ought to know it. Many of its leading members were themselves subject to investigations, audits, examinations, etc. And as Tim reminded us, they were subject to being arrested. So they ought to be particularly careful and mindful, not only from the point of view of the rule of law, but from the point of view of democracy. What the elections on March 2nd showed is that the Guyanese electorate has a very low tolerance for government misbehavior. You know, I said it months ago. The APNU coalition ought to have been proud to be in a country where in 5 years we've changed governments twice. And if the PPP doesn't manage well, I would not be surprised if they were changed again come 2025 or earlier if elections were being held.
Well, I would not be surprised myself because the mindset of the Guyanese, as you said, is changing. So I think the Guyanese are now realizing the importance of change if what you put in, if you do something, you try something. Guyanese do not want, and it was used, the term of the definition for insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So I don't think Guyanese any longer want to be referred as insane people, because it seemed that half of this country might have been insane recently when you look at what was happening and people were willing to fall in line and even pay attention to anything that the administration, or what I refer to as the cabal, was saying. I want to get into something that is affecting, or is going to affect Guyanese. Is going to have a negative impact on Guyanese if it is not rolled out properly. And it is a case whereas with our newfound wealth, our petroleum, the asset we have found, the resource we have found, the petroleum that is mostly ExxonMobil, we get in them to take it, however, get the resource out and get our money to us. ExxonMobil had its executive, or the CEO, or whoever he is, I don't know. I got to see with me. I a little rough around the edges when it comes to these people.
I think it was the president.
The president of ExxonMobil?
Yes.
Okay, well, he feel like he's the president of a country because he's suggesting they could go other places. What is your take on that, Mr. Ram? And the fact that they did not invite Kaicho News, that is the leading, have more expertise on oil in Guyana and the understanding of ExxonMobil's behavior, its modus operandi in different countries. They did not invite Kaicho News, but they had some other, newsroom and other people who were obviously not in depth with ExxonMobil and their behavior in other countries. What is your take on that meeting today?
Well, I was really, really disappointed. It was the first engagement, formal engagement, or public engagement that the Exxon has had with a newly elected government of a country, a sovereign state. And without evaluating what might have taken place, the president of Exxon, one of 3 contractors in the Payara and the other finds, decides that it would practically threaten the government of Guyana. And I find that, as a Guyanese, a patriot, and just a reasonable person, I find that shocking. I don't know what Exxon could have thought they would get out of that type of macho behavior. In my view, it was entirely inappropriate, and it was probably bullying. And I do believe it could be counterproductive, and we all can lose. I don't think we necessarily want to play a similar kind of game, but a sovereign state should not tolerate any investor, no matter who it is, to behave the way the president of Exxon did today. I find it wholly unacceptable.
What do you expect, or you say you don't expect the government to respond or act in that manner, and you said the term, I forget the term we said, but it's really bullyism, you understand? And it's thug-like. I must say, Mr. Ram, you might not want to say, but I see thug-like behavior in ExxonMobil's president. You understand? He's a tuggy. That's how I put it. What response do you think would be befitting something like that from the government of Guyana?
I think at this stage, the government of Guyana should do what it has every right to do under the petroleum agreement, which is to consider the development plan for the Payara that has been submitted. And if it feels that in any way the development is inconsistent with the law or good practice, it has a right to say so. Exxon has a right to express itself, and discussions ought to be taking place. And there's a process in the petroleum agreement for the resolution of such differences. But I come back, for the president of Exxon to behave the way he did may have even shocked Sinok Nexen and Hess, which are the 2 other partners. And in fact, the 2 of them collectively have a bigger stake in the block than Exxon does.
Well, I would want to think they would have to issue.
If I may, I'm not sure
Yes.
that he was speaking for the entire consortium of 3 contractors. And that needs to be clarified.
Well, I'm hoping they do that in some form of a statement or press conference, because for the first time, Mr. Ram, Glenn Glenn Lal, Kaichur News' publisher, constantly asks me to get on board and talk about oil. I'm going to tell you, tomorrow morning, I am going to be taking on Exxon head on, because if Exxon is of the assumption we just start a relationship and merely a year in, entity such as Exxon, who obviously has the finances and everything else, their income is obviously bigger than our country's income, our budget. But if they start acting like that, somehow I would want to think they have some unique understanding that they could just roll over us like they were a lawnmower and we were grass. And I can tell you, I will educate the Guyanese people about Exxon, its behavior across the world, what they have been doing, and their thug-like attitude that now turns up here in other parts of the world. And I think when Guyanese people are educated about them and their attitude, they will be looking at oil and how we have to treat investors differently. Mr. Jonas, you and we had interviews before where you have a stance as to how foreign investors must be treated. Please give me your take on Exxon's president's attitude in the last press conference they had, and how do you think it should be treated by the government of Guyana?
He's not the president. His title is the country manager. So he's the
country manager. Okay.
Yeah.
Country manager.
Oh,
okay. Thank you.
We sitting here don't know all the facts about the background, but there are a couple of things that we do know, and it's important to be fair on both sides. Now, for me, I'm a red-blooded patriotic Guyanese, so any insult offered by a foreigner, I will be the first to jump up and quarrel. But we have to be fair. There is an agreement, and the agreement had timelines, and the agreement is moving forward. And one party is putting a lot of money into this thing in anticipation of those timelines, in expectation of getting a reward at the end of it. You could talk to your blue in the face about fair contract, renegotiate, this, that, and the other. But there's an agreement, there are timelines, and we have to now ask ourselves, that party that went and built that humongous ocean-going vessel to store oil and bring out oil, that put up a rig, that fly in helicopters out there 3 times a day, that's spending all of that money, has timelines. They got bills to pay. They're spending a lot of money. They want the money back. So before we jump to right and wrong, let us ask ourselves what we know. And here's a couple things I want to give you to give it some perspective. The other day, there was a hullabaloo with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, saying that they are going to take ExxonMobil to court because of some spillage. A couple gallons was spilled from the rig. That is important. But do you think the EPA sent officers out there in the EPA's motor vessel to go and test the water by the rig, or to go and do an inspection, and they discovered that a couple gallons had leaked? Or do you think that ExxonMobil, using its own infrastructure, honestly came to the EPA to disclose, as they are required to do under the agreement, guess what? We had a slight mishap. It's not large, but there are these couple gallons there in the water. You see, what I can tell you is that our Sea Defense, our Coast Guard, our CDC, they don't even have the beginning of the infrastructure to go and investigate and do anything. Our GRA doesn't even have the beginning of the personnel to go and check Exxon's accounts to see if they are giving us a fair return based on the percentages as agreed. We are so small, we are so puny, we are so at an infant stage that we rely on them for everything. And they are the ones who are coming to say, this is our accounts that we gotta accept. There was a spill. You would never know there's a spill, but they come and say there's a spill. These are the steps we're taking. Whatever fine we gotta pay. So the first thing we gotta understand is that already, and I have seen this because I've seen how the corporate culture that is involved. These are some hard-nosed, greedy people, but they have so far held up their agreement and they are trying to reach their timelines. And we don't have the capacity to go and police them like
I
bad. So
I must tell you from what I know, Timothy. I must tell you from what I know. All that you're suggesting, all the nice and fancy, fanciful things that are afforded to ExxonMobil, we are footing the bill for. So ExxonMobil isn't doing Guyana any favor, I must say.
I didn't suggest that they're doing us any favors. In fact, I said very clearly that there's some greedy, hard-nosed people. But if you're saying, then you must say that you went on a boat by our Coast Guard and you found the leak. Because if you didn't go in a boat and find the leak, but if Exxon honestly came to you and said, hey, there was an issue, then you have to say to Exxon, I acknowledge your honesty in disclosing that issue that I would have never find out about on my own wits. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that fairness cuts two ways. So now, when we go to this agreement that we're talking about, Payara, and timelines are set, and money is spent, and wells are dug, and then a new government comes in, and you and I and Chris, we are saying it needs to be renegotiated, no doubt. But that is not enough. If you are competent, if you have a position, a policy in mind, what you need to say at this stage is not, man, we got to talk. You need to say, these are the issues I have with the agreement, and these are my proposals for change. That is something that can start a conversation. But we haven't done that yet, and I don't believe the government has done that. You see, so we're not at a stage where we're saying, these are the changes we want, can we talk about it and set timelines? We're at the stage where we're saying, we just putting this thing on hold. We're going to get advice. We don't know what we want. We don't know where we're going. We're hoping for some advice, and then we'll tell you what we think. And that's not good enough. So yes, we've cut a bad card. We've cut a bad deal. We need to fix it. But we need to be professional in our approach as to how to fix it. And all I've seen in the papers, and please correct me if I'm wrong, all I've seen is government decided they're putting this thing on hold. They're hiring some lady from Canada. Now, I've heard talk about whether she's competent, whether she's not, what her background is. I don't know. Maybe you can help me. But if at this stage all we're doing is asking somebody whether it's a good deal, asking somebody what the position is, but we've put an arrangement on hold and breached timelines while we're asking without even having a definitive position. Well, let me tell you, the country manager made unfortunate remarks. He needed to be much more diplomatic because his comments were not polite. But I would like to say that if we are going to say that we're professionals and we are treating with these people professionally, we got to do it right on our side as well. We demand the right thing from them, and we must demand the right thing from them, but you can't just blindly say it one way. And I would challenge anybody to say, what aspect of the agreement are you unhappy with, and what proposal for change do you have? Because that's the only way you can negotiate a contract if you have an idea in your head what you want. And so far, all I see is we don't even know yet if we're happy with the lady that we hired to put an idea in our head.
Mr. Jonas, I must say, and you will recognize that this administration is now going 3 to 4 weeks in, and this is what could be considered to be the bread and butter, the future of this country. And we might have, a little bit more money in the pocket. But if not dealt with in the right manner, we might never have peace again in this country. So don't you think we need to sit back and take a little time and say, well, here, this is how we're going to know Exxon got timelines. And as a result of Exxon keeping with the timelines, we get a contract that adds up to bread out to the people's mouth. Then we get, things keep going like that as a result of their speediness and their timeline. At some point in time, we got to stop and say, well, we got to be prudent about this, how we move forward, when we move forward. And I don't see a month with a new administration in who's fighting COVID-19 and so many different fronts. I don't see with the rush.
So let me ask you, have you heard the administration say that they need a month? Because you just said
they haven't fixed a timeline.
Thank you. Now,
but I know they're working on it.
Don't you think that at least if you're coming to me and we have a contract and you say, boy, I gotta look at this thing again, at least you should say to me, I need a month. So I could say, boy, either too long or I could live with that. But so far, I haven't even heard that basic, we need a month. We putting this thing on hold for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. We haven't even heard that.
Timothy, the truth is, not everything is in the public domain. I don't think anybody has asked the question to the president or the prime minister as how long they think this same situation, looking into PIR and so on, would be needed. Time period would be needed. But I can tell you,
not everything is in the public domain, and yet you have taken one side strongly. But I started this conversation saying we don't know a lot. There's a lot we don't know, but you have to be fair to both sides. But you started the conversation very strongly on one side, but I'm glad you are now saying there's a lot we don't know. So don't let's prejudge. But I hope at a minimum that when the government said to Exxon, we putting this thing on pause, they didn't just leave it there, but they said in 1 month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we will be back to you with a firm position. Because if they just said we're putting this thing on pause and the companies there haven't spent their money ready to meet their deadline and they don't know if the pause is 1 month or 1 year, then maybe a hasty and impolite country manager might say, move quick. So we don't know enough. And what I'm saying is when we don't know enough, we need to understand the national interest of honoring arrangements and the national interest of getting the best deal we can. And we don't know enough to judge.
Can I come in?
I'll take you there.
Can I
yes, Mr. Ram.
Please what do. We're talking about, we've had an exploration situation. It's essentially a development plan leading to a production license, which can run for a full 30 years. A plan has been submitted, that it has been referred to a team, and Tim is correct. There are questions about the individual, but I don't see what can be so wrong that we should want to carefully analyze a plan that once you have given a production license is going to run for 20 years plus an extension of 10. That's 30 years. And I think, I differ with him on this. This is about spending money. The money hasn't yet been spent. Yes, some money has gone into the exploration phase, but this is to go into a production stage. That's a different story. And I don't want to I don't think the government is some malevolently putting something on hold. It has to be considered, and that's what it says. That's what the agreement says. It talks about discussion taking place and questions being asked, and if it becomes necessary, it's referred to as sole expert. I think that's the term that they use. But I don't see it as improper. I don't see it as a breach that the government, a new minister, particularly in an agreement, and Tim is correct. Our government as a collective has signed an agreement. But there are serious issues that we have to consider, not only in our interest, in the oil companies' interest as well. So let us resolve these issues as best as we can. I'm not talking about renegotiating the contract at this stage. I think there's a place for that. But we're talking about the priority development plan and the right of the government to analyze it and to choose whoever they wish, given that we don't have the resources, that they have the right to carry out as thorough a review as possible. And I don't think the country manager, as Tim corrected me, should be trying to bully us, which is exactly what Clyde and Company, which were retained by the coalition government, said Exxon did to the coalition government. It is almost a Mark II of it. I believe in the sanctity of contracts, but I do not believe that you can have illegalities in a contract and then plead sanctity. But that's a different forum. And I want to say, I'm looking at the billboard, accountability and transparency, and we've got diverted entirely into this contract. I would have liked to talk about transparency and accountability because I have serious issues about transparency and accountability at governmental level, at party level.
One question before you go on to accountability and transparency, Mr. Ram. Giving some respect and fairness to our partners, ExxonMobil, would you give a timeline? What do you think would be a fair timeline? If somebody like yourself was asked to go in, bring in some expert, revisit this Payara situation, what would be a fair timeline? Or would you leave it open?
Chris, let me interrupt you 1 second if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
Not at all.
Because the question you're asking, Chris, is not fair. We don't know. You see, Chris talked about the need to be satisfied of the facts and be satisfied of a clear deal and be satisfied you've got good advice. He's absolutely right. But I would challenge anyone in this forum, you, Chris, and I'll admit I don't know, as to what advice, what resources, what inquiries were made by the previous regime. Maybe they have a report by another Canadian expert that's sitting down somewhere. Maybe they've already signed off and said to Exxon, our Canadian expert has approved your Payara arrangement, and therefore we're ready to go ahead. We'll sign off as soon as these elections are over. Maybe this groundwork has already been done, and I don't know, and you don't know, and Chris doesn't know. And that's what goes to accountability and transparency. Because I would like this government to say to us, not just we go in and hire this Canadian lady, but that we've inquired and we've spoken to the previous Minister of Natural Resources, the same man who signed the agreement and said he didn't read it before he signed it, that same beacon of competence. And the government should then, in the spirit of accountability and transparency, say nothing has been done. This is a national disgrace. Or say, we got this advice and we have reservations about it, so we need a month to get other advice. But none of us knows. So there's no transparency, there's no accountability, but we're ready to jump down the throat of the foreigner because we're suspicious. We cannot operate like that as a sovereign.
Timothy, I must ask before we move on. Is ExxonMobil or any of ExxonMobil affiliates your clients?
No, I haven't done any work for any ExxonMobil affiliates for years. So
okay,
no,
sir,
answer to your question is no.
Mr. Ram, straight into accountability and transparency, which should be the pillars that the new Guyana should be built on.
Well, yes, it should be built on the rule of law and constitutional law. But in terms of transparency and accountability, we know the 2016 agreement. They did not want to let that out, so the minister said, but it was all some confidentiality clause, which turned out to be absolutely a misconstruction of a certain section of the act. But we as a country are loath to practice transparency and accountability, and I don't want him to take this personally. The least accountable and transparent entity in this country are the political parties. You tell me which political party is transparent and accountable, particularly when it comes to financial matters. And these are the same people. These are the same people who want to run the country when they are not accountable. You look to see how many people are after 35 days from the declaration of from the gazetting of the results. They are supposed to file with the chief elections officer a statement of expenses. I would love to see that statement. Just
Mr. Jonas, you could chip in here.
Well, the shoestring budget that Anna operated on, I think Chris would laugh at us. But he's absolutely right. Because we saw bought crowds all around the country. We saw flags going up. We saw money supposedly spent on paid political ads at NCN by one party. The amount of money that we saw being spent was obscene. And Chris is quite right. There's no accountability for it. Ramjatan said that the incumbent has certain perks, certain advantages. No accountability. So he's right.
I don't think Chris was referring to the two major political parties alone. He said which one. So I think you should stick to explaining why Anog has not made those declarations as yet.
It's not yet due. It's not yet due.
I think if you check your timelines, Critic, you may have to ask again.
So the time may reach yet.
You jumped on a bandwagon there, Critic, but I think you jumped before you looked.
Well, you're playing close to the...
You asked me something that I want to get back to. You asked me about working for Exxon. I wanted to elaborate because I had a mild problem with your question.
Yes, Chris.
There is no way, if I had any association with Exxon and was working for them, that I would be commenting one way or another as I've just been commenting about Exxon. It doesn't go like that. It doesn't happen like that.
It's unprofessional, unethical.
It's worse than unprofessional.
Roger that, sir. So
now, in terms of the agreement, because I was trying to get us to the point where we talked about what we want out of this agreement. And the thing is, the people I've spoken to, the experts that I've spoken to, they don't know the answer to that. But I've had a look at it, and there are a couple things that come up that I hope this Canadian lady points to and fixes. What I noticed is that in terms of accidents and oil spills, the onus is on our CDC to fix it. No, we don't have the expertise to do that. We don't have the skill to do it. And one of the things I want to suggest, because I'm trying my best to make constructive criticism suggestions to the powers that be, is that they very carefully look at how the agreement deals with accidents, with calamities, and with the cost of repairing those calamities. Because there's no doubt that any damage caused is not our fault. It's not we drilling out there. So the contract has to be very clear. It has to mandate that ExxonMobil is responsible for the cost of any cleanup at its own cost, and without trying to pretend that cost is a loss against which they can set off what they're paying us. That is one of the things I would ask for, because that goes to an eventuality that we can't control and that can destroy our country. Anything else is gravy after that, but that is one that I think needs to be dealt with very, very carefully. That whether they're negligent or not, if there's an incident, however it is caused, they stop what they're doing and they fix it, whatever the expense is, in a timeline, at their own cost and without cost to us.
Thanks for that contribution, Timothy, and I'm hoping the government is listening, and that could be included in the contract for the betterment of Guyanese, because it seems very wise to go in that direction or take that position. Mr. Ram, back to you as it results to accountability and transparency.
And the specific question is?
Well, you said you wanted to talk about accountability and transparency.
Well, I didn't want to talk. I was invited to talk on accountability and transparency. That's what I'm reading on the screen.
Are you satisfied? Are you satisfied with what is being put in place presently by the new administration that will lead to them themselves being accountable and transparent? Are you satisfied with that? What do you expect to see being rolled out by this administration that will afford Guyanese the opportunity to see accountability and transparency with? There's been a lot of different issues, the procurement, how it is treated, the procurement sector, how it's been treated, a lot of different issues, how things, how government deal with the people, the dissemination of information. What would you like to see in light of your understanding of the last 5 years and the last 23 years, PPP's 23 years and the last administration for 5 years? What would you like to see as it relates to accountability and transparency with government?
Well, I would certainly like to see a much, much more robust Access to Information Act. The act that we have in place has been most ineffective. It has done nothing to enhance accountability and transparency. Procurement, I would like to see us urgently getting a procurement commission going. We should have, I thought the rules were exploitable, even though that there were some improvements over the past 5 years. I still thought they were exploitable. I think the audit office, the state audit, needs considerably more information, resources to carry out its job. We need the Integrity Commission Act. I'm not sure how many of the ministers and the members of parliament that have been named, how many of them, having fallen under the act in the past, have in fact complied with the requirements of the act. And those are basic elementary matters. How could you not? They have no right to be in the National Assembly if they're not prepared to carry out the laws which they themselves make. The audit office, we haven't had a parliament now for over a year. The audit office 2018 report is under lockdown, and not by COVID-19. It's under lockdown because the National Assembly has not met for that long a time, and so it's on the wraps. We don't know. You have contracts being signed for employees and these contract employees and special persons. We don't know what kinds of monies are being paid. We knock the public servant so often. The poor public servant, you could know every single public servant on the establishment, what is their salary. Yet, in respect of those contract employees who are earning 2, 3, and 4 times more than their counterparts in the public service itself, don't have to have any kind of disclosure. So where is the transparency in all of this practice? As I said, I'm not going to spare the political parties. Tim and I are good friends, and he's now a political leader, and he has to accept. Political parties must now become more accountable, because when they go into parliament, they practice the same lack of disclosure, the same on-the-hand kind of transactions that they do. And where does this money come from? We know lots of private companies who help to finance these political parties. Do they tell their shareholders what they do? Does a bank, CIH or DDL say, look, we have done this, or a BK International or whichever one, we have done this? And they've probably claimed it as a tax-deductible expense. That's the kind of thing we got to be talking about until we can clean up in our political parties and our political culture. I don't want to hold anybody else responsible until I can hold the politicians responsible.
Mr. Ram, help me out here. These are issues that you identify. Things need to be put in place. Is there anything else other than hope that these things happen that the Guyanese people could do?
Well, I think the Guyanese people, look, and the smaller parties, and Tim himself played a really great part over the past 5 months. The same kind of role the smaller parties played over the past 5 months They have got to continue doing that. They've got to hold the APNU and the PPPC and say, look, things have changed. The 5 months that we Guyanese have had to endure means that we will no longer tolerate any kind of unsatisfactory, unlawful, improper, illegal behavior from any of our political parties. We've got to start demanding accountability and transparency. As I said, we've got to be able to ask for information. And in fact, certain information should be there on the website of all these government agencies without you even having to ask for them. We have a right to it. And I am hopeful. I think you used the word hope. You know, if you don't live in hope, what else do you do? So I'm hopeful that we collectively can impress on our politicians, both on the side of the government and on the other side. And I think I should say here and now, I would have liked to see a much stronger opposition in the National Assembly, because I think a good opposition makes a good government. I believe we've got what has been announced so far is weak. It's not, I don't think it's going to challenge the PPPC as it really ought to. But I'm hoping, and as I said, I'm looking to the smaller parties, because I thought they've done a wonderful job, not only as a party, but the persons who supported them, who came out and guarded the ballot boxes. Those were acts, noble acts, that I don't think we've had before. And therefore, those are the things that give me hope. And it's people like you who will raise these issues if we have to embarrass the government or the opposition, our friend or our foe. I think we have to do it once it is in the national interest and once we think it will make Guyana a better place for us and for those who come after us, because I think that's our major duty, to leave this place better than we found it.
Interesting. On accountability and transparency. Yes, Timothy.
As much as I have enormous respect for Chris, I find that Chris, often in his approach, is not as systematic as I would like. Cause and effect have to be linked. Now, any Guyanese who has been interested in politics over the last 2 weeks sees what the problems are. And I want us to go through them, because every Guyanese will remember what has come to light. The first thing that come to light is the amount of money we hear some of these people making as presidential advisor, government advisor, this role and that role. The PPP, with great glee, gave lists of how much money the various political stooges were making at fake roles, pretended employment under the APNU administration.
People in media too, Timothy. Let me just cut you. People in media too. Gordon Mosley was collecting 200,000 from GPL to do nothing. Gordon Mosley, Gordon Mosley.
I'm going to get to the media critic. So the first thing that we got to say is there has got to be a system of regulating this practice of appointing presidential advisors without any context. Because if you're appointed as Minister of Finance, there's a finance ministry that has technocrats and professionals working there. What you want with an advisor. If you're president in there, what you want with an advisor. But we've seen Norton and Corbyn and all kinds of people making plenty money as advisors. But you know what? After we criticized the previous administration for that, you then see in the papers, Roger Luncheon appointed as advisor. Robert Prasad comes back, goes into a position manufactured for Greenwich by the PNC, a position that didn't exist. But instead of saying this position doesn't exist, there's no need for it, the PPP didn't just throw out the position. They brought in a friend to fill that position. So we see the same thing happening now, having quarreled about all these presidential advisors and contracts and that kind of thing. We read in the papers, this person appointed, this friend appointed, and we see the same thing happening again. So in terms of presidential and government advisors, there needs to be strict criteria, strict disclosure to Parliament, and strict accountability. You can't just allow it to happen like that, because every 5-year cycle it happens. And we cannot continue to accommodate that. The next thing is the strong division that we need to have between technocrats, professionals, and political appointees. So we read in the papers, people being fired left, right, and center. Eggball, Imran Khan, that poisonous man that needs to go back to Antigua, first one to be fired from the media. But why was it necessary to fire him? Because he's political. At no point did he even pretend to offer an objective professional job as a journalist or as the head of the media house. And why is that? Because NCN and Chronicle are owned by the state, are owned by the government, and have always been propaganda tools. So what is the solution? What the government now has done is they've put one of their own to be the propaganda tool on their side. And I want to say this very quickly because I've made inquiries. The lady that has been appointed CEO, my inquiries have revealed that she is a competent lady. She tries her best. She is a well-intentioned person. And I want to say that clearly, because although she's a political appointee put in there by the party whom she favors, she herself, by all accounts and I've checked, is a lady of quality, a professional, a lady of standing. But NCN and Chronicle should not be state-owned. The state should not own media houses. We have seen it. We have seen how radically those same rags, the Chronicle and NCN, change their tone when the government changes. They don't even pretend to be news. So the solution for accountability and transparency is not to put in my person there so that half the country who supports me happy and the other half X. The solution is to understand that the system needs to change. The other day recently, we heard Central Housing and Planning man got fired, Mr. Saul, an old army man. I don't know anything about Mr. Saul, but I know he's a political appointee. But you know something? If you remember from more than 5 years ago, there was a big hullabaloo about Pradoville and Pradoville 2 and the allocation of land through Central Housing because of control by the executive. So we have to fix the system because we know APNU did it, but we also know PPP did it before. So do we just happily close our eyes and allow a CEO to go into Central Housing, a new board of Central Housing to be appointed by the minister so that you have more of the same? Or do we ask for transparency and accountability and say that board should have members from all parties, and that CEO can't be hired and fired by the government. That CEO must be a professional, hired and fired by the board. That is what transparency and accountability is about. We need to fix our systems. We need to fix our systems or we will have more of the same. NISIL, we have just heard about the appointment of the NISIL board. The previous board was political. This board, and you have to look and see where the purse strings are.
Tim, I'm on that board.
More of the same.
I'm
glad about that, actually. I heard about that and I'm glad, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
You're on the board, Mr. Ram?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How do you see being effective, being on that board? How do you see you bringing efficiency, accountability, and transparency to NISIL?
Well, I think certainly the absolutely basic norms of reporting to Parliament, reporting to shareholders, filing. NISIL is a company and it's subject to the Companies Act. It has to file annual report with the Deeds and Commercial Registry. It has to have audit. It has, and you know, we're talking law. I have made this point that as a director, I owe a fiduciary duty to the company, even though it's a state company. And I would want to be able to operate like if I were operating in any other entity. I believe that we should have the same or even greater level of accountability. I believe contracts, as I said, ought to be disclosed. These contracts, Tim, and I think your group is now in the National Assembly, but there's no reason why we can't raise it out. Let us put in the parliamentary debate, justify the contract employees. If you look at the estimates, it does have a line item called contract employees. Let the parties raise the questions, which is why I'm saying I'm very disappointed in the APNU team, because I'm not even sure who the shadow finance minister is going to be. They should be asking those questions and demanding answers. You can't refuse to answer a question when it's asked in the debate. So in terms of my role, I hope I can do justice to my appointment. I will give the best as I can, which is probably a higher standard than the Companies Act itself requires. But I do believe that I have an obligation to, and I would like to think that at no time my conduct as a director of NISIL will be subject to any kind of adverse comment. If I'm asked to justify anything I do, I will certainly feel bound to do that, because I see myself in some ways as a proxy. This is a state company. I see myself as a proxy for the rest of the people of Guyana.
I feel good hearing you saying that, Mr. Ram, and I can tell you I will, outside as the Guyanese Critic, will be doing my own accountability and transparency and looking over you guys. And I'm hoping, because you see the lacking of transparency and accountability, specifically with the information agency, I'm hoping that I could ask you, what is going on at NISIL and have information forthcoming. That being said, what I want to put forward, and you guys could take it alternately, accountability and transparency, if it was the hallmark or the guide for GECOM, we wouldn't have an issue where a CEO had to be asked to bring forward basic accounting documents like SOPs, things that the foundation of an election. A man keeping it back, like if there was some contractual agreement for him to keep it secret. How do we work on accountability, infusing accountability and transparency at GECOM to make that a better entity, to ensure we do not experience what we've experienced for the last 5 months? How do you see that, guys?
Go on, Tim.
GECOM is an enormous problem because the structure ensures its independence, and the existing individuals who comprise GECOM are split 3-3 with the one chair with the swing vote. GECOM's secretariat has been staffed in a way that permitted them, and they thought with impunity, to slew the election in one direction. But how do you go about reforming that? To reform it, the commission, which is those 7 people, have to take a decision as to hiring and firing. It worries me that we haven't heard from them yet that decisions have been made, that some very key figures who clearly were part of a process have not yet been fired. That really worries me. But in terms of Parliament intervening or the executive intervening, that is not possible unless both parties agree, because some of this would need constitutional change. That's the problem.
What is the importance of political infusion? It is obvious, Timothy, in Guyana, anything that politicians put their hands on, automatically lack transparency and accountability. What is the purpose of political infusion? Like those, the chairperson and the other commissioners, what's the purpose for them there at GECOM?
Well, I think you gotta ask the question another way. We know what their purpose is. Their purpose is to conduct the election. But if you are suggesting that anything politicians touch is corrupt, then you need to be in a position to make a proposal as to the structure you would like to see.
I would like to see a structure without political infusion at GECOM. Is there any model across the world?
That's not a structure, that's a pipe dream.
That is what?
That's a pipe dream, that's not a structure. Right now the structure is that opposition picks 3, government picks 3, and opposition produces a list of 6, and from that list of 6, the president picks 1 for the chair. That's a system. What you just said, you want something that doesn't involve politicians, is a pipe dream. You haven't even said how many you got on the side and how they're being appointed. It is impossible to create a system that doesn't have input at a political level. And therefore, what you have to do in the system you create, you have to find a way that makes sure that the input is neutral, leads to a neutral and fair result. It was corrupted by Granger when he refused the first list of 6 by Jaglio. We know that. We know that it is unnecessarily corrupted because you got 3 on one side, 3 on the other side that will never agree on anything substantial. So we know there's a problem, but that's what we're faced with, and it's not going to change, because to change it, you got to change the Constitution.
So there's no possibility of us looking and including those changes in constitutional reform? Have we given up on that?
You got to get APNU and PPP to agree. And APNU is concerned about promoting APNU, and PPP is concerned about promoting PPP.
Let's face this as well. Look, this Carter Price model for GECOM, yes, it has its flaws. It has worked pretty well on a number of occasions. It has worked. You know, a lot of this started because then President Granger, abused his powers to impose James Patterson as chairman of GECOM. And then you have people like Lowenfield and a number of them, no code of conduct, just violating basic rules of decency. From all appearances, and this matter is sub judice, and one has to, Mingo is innocent until he's proven guilty, and so is Lowenfield. But these are guys who try to corrupt and distort basic statements of polls. Now, if the chairperson had stepped in, we would not have had the agonizing 5 months that we've had between March the 2nd and August the 2nd. The chairman allowed that situation to happen. Everybody had those statements. We need some simple mechanism. The statement polls come in, we can all analyze them. Those should have been transparent. But no, what happened? They went to Lowenfield, he hid them. Mingo had some, and he created some spreadsheet. He has given spreadsheet such a bad name. You know, it's an accounting tool. So what we're dealing with, what we dealt with in that period is sheer criminality. And as Bruce Golding said, he has never seen a more transparent attempt at rigging of elections. So we have people behaving outside the norms. Let us not, yes, the Constitution and no Constitution is perfect. We have a bifurcated kind of electorate, and we will have problems. We can get better. As I said, I am proud that we have changed governments twice in the past 5 years. If only Claudette Singh had done her work. If only Lowenfield did and Mingo did, and Waller Lawrence did not do what they did, we would have had and in fact we did have a decent elections. But we had people who were bent on corrupting the system and breaking the law. So that's what we have to talk about, the rule of law. I have said, since I came on to the board of NISIL, I have been talking about the code of conduct. What if what if GECOM had a code of conduct for all election agents?
A code of conduct is a piece of paper, Chris. If you're stealing, you're stealing. You could put a wonderful code of conduct, but no code of conduct can cure what Mingo did.
But if you violate it, you go. If you violate it, you go.
But you don't need a code of conduct to say that. You think Mingo should stay in a fair world without a code of conduct? But I noticed you started, and your criticisms of the individuals involved is absolutely fair. I'm not going there, but I don't think that was the starting point. I would like to remind you the shoe was on the other foot in 2011 when Lowenfield's predecessor,
Mr. Bodo.
yes, tried to give a majority seats to PPP. You see, as a nation, we have to do some introspection. We like pointing fingers, but the corruption and the rot is so deep that we got to start thinking about looking within. I hope that there's accountability at this stage. I would like to see some of these people in jail because an example needs to be set. But don't.
We have 5 minutes more in closing. Both you, Mr. Ram and Timothy, do you see GECOM moving forward with Kadir Singh as the chairperson in the future?
There is no limitation on the duration of her service as chairperson. That's my understanding. Tim, you can correct me.
Agreed.
Whether she would want it, so it's really a voluntary matter. Does she feel, the sobriquet Diane Lady, does she feel that she has it in her to go through this perhaps again? But I think, and I'm glad, I don't believe in witch hunting, but I believe in the rule of law. I believe people should pay for their crime. And whoever committed electoral crime in 2011, on 2015, and 2020, or whenever other time, they should pay. We have tended to want to allow people, oh, don't let us witch hunt, let bygone be bygone. No, we cannot do that. Think of how we as a country were on the brink.
Mr. Ram, maybe my question let me expound a little more on what really I was asking. Do you see Claudette Singh, after her actions for the last 5 months, after March the 2nd election, moving forward? Do you think GECOM can move forward with Claudette Singh at its head?
Well, let me tell you, I'll answer it this way. I think the courts will deal with those who have committed or are suspected of committed criminal action. But I do believe a commission of inquiry needs to be conducted. And Claudette Singh and everyone else, every one of the commissioners on both sides, they must answer for their own conduct, not only from March the 2nd, but even perhaps before March the 2nd. But we need a commission of inquiry. We have to understand what were the causes, what led to it, and because we must not ever allow that situation to happen again. All we had to do, those statements of polls, but we simply allowed persons from I think it's the 5th and the 13th and whenever else, and we went on and on and on. No self-respecting country, and Guyana has talent. Guyana has decent people. Why did we have to go through that? A commission of inquiry must answer those questions and
Mr. Jonas,
provide the solutions for the future.
Thanks, Mr. Ram. Mr. Jonas, same question. Do you think we can move forward with?
The question supposes we can do anything about it, and I think that's what Chris was getting at. Madam Justice Claudette Singh, as chairman, cannot be removed by you, me, president, or the opposition. She can only be removed if she chooses to step down or if she is certified insane. So the question you got to ask is, does she want to stay there? I know she's had a hard go of it, and I know that she has been embattled and attacked on all sides. And the pressure that she must have been under must have been enormous. There is something not a lot of Guyanese know, but Says Conrad had made this statement quietly once, and I want to repeat it because I can only imagine what she went through when she discovered this. When Mingo did his nonsense at Ashman's building, this is just 2 days after the election, and then moved over when the Chief Justice set aside what he did and said, you got to recount. And then we had a big palaver. At that stage, according to the report I got, the statements of poll disappeared for Region 4. They disappeared within GECOM. I hope I'm proved wrong. I hope GECOM can produce them. But if it is true that by the 7th or 8th or 9th of March, the statements of poll had disappeared, I don't know what Claudette Singh could have done to produce an election result. And I think she may well have been in a serious quandary, because she couldn't at that stage go to the country and say, we can't find the SOPs, too bad. And maybe the recount was therefore necessary so that statements of recount could be used. But there are a lot of factors that we don't know about. But if she wants to stay, no one can move her under the Constitution. And I don't see the two parties agreeing to revise the Constitution in the next 5 years. But at some point and somehow, that house got to get cleaned. And I hope that Justice Singh does it urgently and doesn't wait 4 years to start a last minute thing in 4.5 years. That house has to be cleaned. And only she can do it.
Mr. Ram, I want to thank you guys for this evening's, being a part of this evening's program. Globespan 24/7 has been very interesting having this
Thank
kind
you, Critic.
of...
We haven't had a video of you, but this picture I see of you is a man with a haircut. Critic, you had a haircut? Is it that you're embarrassed to come in public?
No, sir, it's a whole picture come back, don't worry.
From decent days, I understand. All right.
Yes. No, I had some internet problems, so I had to tune in via phone. I want to thank you guys, and I want to say, if people do not say it enough, Mr. Ram and Mr. Jonas, the role that you play is very important. It's integral in educating the people of this country. It's very, very important. So don't forget that it's not just about being out there and saying what you see. There's a little more depth, because when we finish these conversations, people call me and they say, Critic, I learned this and I learned that. And you guys must always remember the important role you play in the development of this country. I want to thank you for that role. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in, the viewers. And I want to thank Globespan for giving me this opportunity to moderate tonight, although I is just a standby. And I'm hoping that we can do more of this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, good talking.